All right, and welcome back to a very special edition of the Braking Zone, the official Canyon Chasers podcast. I'm Dave.
I'm Brian.
And we have a super special guest. You're probably seeing another face here popping up on the screen. We have Mike with FuziMoto. He is our suspension expert that we've talked about several times. We've teased having him on the podcast, and we are thrilled that he's here.
So, hi guys, glad to be here.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. I'll give you a little intro onto who Mike is. So, Fuzzy's been in this industry for decades. I don't want to date you too much, but for quite some time, he's been doing just about everything there is. Engine building is kind of the background, right, Mike? That's
yes,
sort
sir.
of where it started for you.
Yes, sir.
Has worked with a bunch of different professional level teams doing tuning and bike setup and mechanic work, but also does an awful lot of suspension work now, based out of the West Coast, so based out of California.
Yep.
I would argue there's probably very few racers in the western half of the U.S. that at least don't know who you are if they don't actually work with you officially. But yeah, you've been around for a long time. I've worked with you personally for quite a few years now at this point, very successfully. So I've appreciated all the help I've gotten from you. But your background kind of spans the gamut. It's sport bikes, it's Harleys, it's kind of anything in between too, right?
Yes, sir. Yep. Mostly sport bikes, I try to stay in my lane is how I would describe it.
We've had a bunch of questions about suspension on the podcast. We talked a little bit about it on a couple of episodes, and it sparked just a ton of comments and questions from viewers. So we thought it'd be great if we could get you on here to actually kind of bring the expert on here and not just what Dave and I remember we're supposed to say, how it actually works.
Here's an expert? Where's an expert?
Yeah. So we've got a couple questions from viewers, and then we'll kind of let this kind of go where it goes, I think.
Suspension is, kind of like your tire wear, but then there's also geometry. Geometry can affect how your bike goes around a corner. Is your bike stable? Does it finish a corner? All these different things that kind of go hand in hand. Every bike's different. Every rider is different, but I'll always ask the same questions. My first question always is, hey, does the bike finish a corner? And you're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I'm in the middle of a corner, I'm at the apex, and you give it gas. Does the bike go where you want it to go, or does the bike go out in left field and you're like, hey, come back here, and then you let off the gas, and by that time you've just lost the exit of that corner, right? So when the rider gives me that answer, then I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's a spring thing. Spring can be geometry because it alters where the bike sits in the stroke, right? So obviously if your spring's too stiff, it ain't going to squat, or it ain't going to raise up. All these different things. The valving is really kind of controlling how fast that spring moves. You'll talk about a lot of people saying, I got to have my sag numbers. Well, honestly, you can go to any professional race. You ain't going to see anybody out there with the tape measure measuring sag.
No kidding. Because that was how I was taught, is that you start with getting your sag number within a range. And that's your baseline for everything. And if you can't get your sag right, then you start playing with changing springs.
Right. And the big thing is not everybody's privy to a multiple of springs, in their garage or in their shop or whatever it may be. There's nothing wrong with setting sag, but don't let it be the ultimate fix all. This is going to be my number and everything's going to be great. You can sit there and set your sag, for whatever number you come up with. You go ride your bike, and then I'll ask you the questions of, hey, does it finish a corner? Can you get to the apex? All these different things. Well, no, let's say it doesn't. Okay, well, then let's make some changes. And then all of a sudden your spring number or your sag numbers that you talked about just went out the window because you added more preload or took away preload and all that. So most pro teams, they'll start with a known spring for a certain bike and then go ride the bike. They'll ask the questions of the rider. They'll look at the data and come together with a solution to make that bike work better for that rider, and I think a lot of people get too involved with and where it has to be here. It has to be 11.73 degrees of swing arm angle and 23.72 degrees of, this and this much trail. Why? Why does it need to be that way? Motorcycles they're never a constant. They're always changing. You're on the gas, you're off the gas, you're doing all these different things, right? Leaning over. I'm going to put whatever you feel comfortable with in that chassis. If you want a 2x4 in there and that makes you feel good, let's do it. You want a pillow in there? Let's do it. Whatever it takes for you to go faster, let's go that way, right? And I think with the advent of the internet, everybody's like, oh, this guy and that guy, and he said this, and it's got to be 12 clicks. And okay, well, you go on with your best stuff, but do that stuff. Even like with you, Brian, when we've tried different things, we start with a known spring for that's his chassis. Like, well, it worked okay. Well, then we changed the spring to something that we normally don't use. And he's like, oh my God, this is a way better bike, and well, there you go. I mean, it's just proof in the pudding of how the rider reacts and how they enjoy their motorcycle. Street bike riding is a little bit different just because there's so many aspects of freeway on-ramps and canyon roads and expansion joints going down the freeway and parking lots, so anytime I work with a street rider, I always ask them, be honest with me. What do you do? Oh, I haul ass. I go really fast. Well, doing 130 miles an hour down the freeway to get to Starbucks is not meaning you're really fast.
So with the street riders, Mike, I always think one of the things that you're trying to deal with on the track, especially for racers, is comfort. Like the idea of comfort is kind of out the window. Nobody really cares about comfort itself.
Right.
We need compliance. We need grip. Like we need all these other things, but comfort, no one's ever coming to you and saying, hey, the bike's a little uncomfortable. Right.
You'd be surprised.
But, you get a couple.
This is hurting my back or my elbows. And I'm like, huh.
Like the compromise for street riders is the comfort's going to be a big factor, right? You
Yes.
may be sitting on that bike in basically the same position for a few hours sometimes on a ride. So it's almost, it seems like trying to tune for street riders can sometimes actually be harder than for racing just because you're trying to compromise so many things.
Absolutely. I mean, racetracks, you have the same 9 or 12 or 16 corners.
Yeah.
Right? Where street, you have 250 miles of wherever it is you're riding. And I mean, realistically, I usually tend to set stuff up softer on the street. Just because regardless of what a person's ego is telling them, I'm sorry, this is probably going to work better for you, and they may not want to hear it, but in hindsight, they're like, oh my God, that was so much better. That felt so much better. My wrists aren't killing me. My back isn't killing me. And even my tire wear might be better or whatever it may be. Right. So.
And when you're saying on a street bike, you might kind of err toward a slightly softer setup. Is that you're going with softer springs, or are you talking damping specifically?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Absolutely both. Like I said, spring basically holds the bike up. It controls geometry, the pitch or the attitude of the bike. And the valving just controls how quickly, or how slowly that suspension's moving. A lot of times I've seen riders that come in and says, oh, the rear end's really, really harsh. And you go over there and you push on the bike or you squat on it or whatever, and you find out that the rebound is actually too fast. So what's happening is when the bike hits a bump, the rear suspension is springing up so fast that it's hitting them in the butt, and they think, oh my God, it's hard. We're like, no, you need to control the spring better. So we'll add a couple clicks of rebound or whatever, maybe valving, however you want to change it. And they're like, oh my God, now it's actually a better bike. It's not beating me up. My tire wears better. I mean, all these different things. And I'll give them the baseline setting and I'll give them the basic understanding of what things do. But I tell people, don't be afraid to change things. There's a reason why all these knobs are there, and if you get lost, you can always text me or call me or email me or whatever and say, hey, where's my starting point? Because my starting point's always going to be the same. But every person may need a little bit more compression here, maybe a little less rebound, whatever it takes them to make them feel good, right? Preload And I always tell people also go big on your adjustment. Nobody, unless you're like Mark Marquez or someone like that, can see what a quarter turn of preload is going to do on the left fork, right? I tell people go 4 or 5 rounds of preload. You want to make sure you're going in the right direction to see if, hey, maybe this is the support I'm looking for, or however you want that bike to do what you want it to do, and regardless if it's street riding or track day riding or racing, it's always the same formula, whatever it takes them. And what I mean by comfort, not necessarily sit back and have a margarita kick back. I'm talking how you feel or say confident of going into that corner, right? I can feel the front tire. I can feel the rear tire. A lot of old school racers used to love heavy springs. Heavy springs will give you a lot of feel, right? The problem with heavy springs is now your tire ends up being your suspension versus your suspension actually being your suspension, right? Because something has to give. But there's all these different things to combat it. I'm one of the people that rather run a light spring with heavy preload, and the reason being is to give you more feel, and if you are out of a certain range, then yes, we'll change springs. Rarely do we ever move the fork up and down on the triple clamp or raise the ride height in the shock unless you're looking for something specific, because it's always a give and take. There's never going to be, this is the setup, it's perfect everywhere, every corner, every time. Doesn't work that way.
You mentioned moving the forks in shock length and stuff. So you're talking geometry changes.
Geometry, yes,
right?
sorry, yes.
Because every bike from the factory has a certain setting where it's at. The forks are set here, the shock is this length, that kind of thing. But oftentimes what becomes the common setup for that particular bike for track riding isn't quite what comes off the showroom. It's a little taller fork, it's a little shorter shock or something like that.
Sure, right.
When riders are kind of coming up with what is that sort of standard setting, is that just through sheer like time on the seat and working with a tuner like you, and people kind of go, hey, this bike tends to like a slightly higher front end or a lower front end and vice versa? Or how do you guys go about coming up with that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like just say for a number, fork height, the way most national teams measure a fork height is from the top of the bottom triple clamp to the axle center. That with the front tire off the ground, like on a pin stand, right? The front tire's fully floating and be able to spin. Average bike usually is like 530 millimeters, okay? Which doesn't matter if it's a ZX6R, an R6, R1, ZX10, they're all right in that range. Unless you have some specific bikes like a Ducati V2, it likes to be at like 490 to 495, somewhere in that range. But you learn that kind of stuff just through experience, right? And working with that team. And again, you have these programs that are out there. It's like, oh yeah, my rake and trail and this number, it has to be this number. Well, you know as well as I do, if you scoot back or lean forward, all those numbers are going to go right out the window, right? So you have to look at the averages. And again, what the rider wants that bike to do, what racetrack you're at, where you're at on the street. I ask people, are you a commuter? Or you just ride on the weekends, Canyon Warrior, whatever, or track day guys. So you have to make it more compliant and more forgiving for them so they enjoy their motorcycles. If they don't enjoy their motorcycles, then we're all out of a job, right? I mean, that's
well, one of the things that we see because Dave and I get a lot of new track riders. There's our first time track riders that come out a lot of times. And they'll come with whatever kind of baggage that they come with, right? So they've heard from their buddy, or they read on Reddit or whatever it was. I've seen several bikes that showed up for a track rider, and for no other reason other than the internet told them to, they have lowered the front end, meaning the fork tubes are slid up in the triple clamp to lower the front end, because that's sporty. That's a more sporty
look.
setup.
Yeah.
It looks the way they think it should. Can you talk a little bit about some of these sort of generalities like that and where that kind of goes wrong for riders?
Well, most manufacturers, when they make a bike, remember, they are building a street bike. I mean, granted, yeah, you can go out and buy a $45,000 Ducati V4R, right? Which is obviously designed for the track, or a M1000 BMW. But still, at the end of the day, it is still a street bike. It still has to go in a parking lot. It still has to be quick turning, because the masses are going to ride these bikes thinking, oh, well, it's got to do this and got to do that. But then you try to take that same street bike and go on the racetrack. It's such a different world. It's a different world when you're doing 30 or 40 miles an hour in a canyon versus 130, 150 miles an hour on a racetrack, right? The geometry of the bike and the action of the bike is going to be totally different. My job as a tuner, especially for track day people, is to make the bike easier for you to ride fast. And what you think the bike may need on the street is not what it needs on the racetrack. When you talk about like raising the front end up, right? The reason I raise the front end up on most bikes is kind of like thinking about doing a bench press, right? When you're bench pressing and you're all bound up like this, you can't do anything, right? But once you're fully extended, you're further away from the center of gravity. It's easy to move it. Same thing with a front end that's higher, right? You can flop side to side a lot easier versus something that's on its nose and the front tire's behind you. So that's makes it easier for the ride to not be fatigued as they're going around, going through corners or transitions or whatever it may be. But when you do that, generally you do have to do lighter springs. And this is where the whole sag thing goes out the window, because, okay, fine. Well, we've raised this front end up, say 30 millimeters, right? Just for a number. Well, a bike will only go into a corner if it can go on its nose. If the springs are so stiff and the bike can't go on its nose, the bike's going to run straight. It isn't going to want to get to the apex, or you're going to have to squeeze the brakes so hard to get that thing to turn. But then as soon as you let go of the brake, guess what? The front end does this, and next thing you know it, you're running off in the middle of, the desert. Like I said, asking the rider what they wanted to do, and then if you have, the ability to look at data, and I'll ask the same question like 5 different ways, to make sure the rider is telling me what I want to hear versus what they think I want to hear. Because it's simple physics. A bike's either going to do this or it's going to do that. It's not going to do all of these different things. I mean, it physically cannot do it. It's one or the other. And you have to make the decision of what is this motorcycle doing? What is this front end doing? What is the rear end doing?
I think to the point that you're making, where you raise the front end a lot of times when guys start doing track riding, I think there's a misconception that when I go to the track, I need a faster turning, more nimble, quicker handling bike. But I find a lot of times it's the opposite, right? I actually want way more stability because I'm going much faster. I'm leaning over much farther. I actually need a much more stable bike in general, not a fast turning bike.
And the raising the front end of the bike will give you that stability, right?
Yeah.
It gives you more leverage from the part of the tire where it's touching the ground. You're further away from that. So you have more leverage to flop that bike side to side, which makes it easier for you to ride the bike faster. But like I said, you have to, when you do raise the front end up like that, to make the bike turn in easier, yes, you put softer springs in it so it can go on its nose.
Yeah.
Right. Or needs to tighten up a corner. Like on most street rides, you're in a corner. I'm doing it. All of a sudden the road tightens up. If you're not familiar, well, if you had lighter springs and you just let off the throttle a little bit, the bike can transition where you want it to go. Where if your springs are really, really stiff in the front end, the bike's just going to run wide. The bike's going to just want to basically stand up or not change a line whatsoever. And you're muscling that thing, and most people just get, they get frustrated.
So far you've talked a lot about the front end. I think that's an important aspect, because so much of where riders' confidence comes from is the front tire and
Sure.
being able to tell what it's doing and feel grip through that front tire.
Right. Through the handlebar. Absolutely.
When you're working with a rider, you're trying to diagnose issues, what typically tends to be the time when you're like, ooh, this actually, what you're describing actually feels like an issue coming from the rear end of the bike, not the front end of the bike?
Yeah. Usually my first question is, like I said earlier, is does the bike finish a corner? So by finishing corner, like I said, you get on the gas. Does the bike keep going where you want it to go, or does the bike run wide? Generally, if the suspension is too soft on the rear, the bike will squat down like this, which great. It squats down, gives you a lot more traction. You have all the traction in the world. The other problem is it unweights the front end. The front end comes barely off the ground. It's kind of like doing a miniature wheelie. And instead of driving that front tire around the corner, the front tire is just sitting there skipping across the top of the pavement, right? So when I ask these questions, like, well, yeah, it's running wide. Well, then add like 5 rounds of preload to the shock. Let's start there, or add some more compression, something to keep the thing from squatting down so much. And you do this, and they go by, oh my God, my bike's, I never knew it could turn this good, right? It actually is going where I want it to go. A lot of riders just feel, especially street riders, they feel that, well, this is what it does. You know, you bought this bike, however many thousands of dollars you've spent, new or used, this is what it does. Well, no, we can change things. And it doesn't matter that a brand of suspension doesn't have to be an Olus, doesn't have to be K-Tech, doesn't have to be Nitron. I have people ask me that stuff all the time. What should I buy? I'm like, I mean, one, what's your budget? And two, where do you live at? Who can help you tune this vehicle, right? Well, I heard K-Tech was the best. Okay, well, sure, anything's tunable, but what's available to you and who's available to you? And I always tell them, well, if it doesn't work out that way, you can always call me. And I think that's why I have a lot of people across the country, because when I have an interview with them or a session, I'm doing the same thing with them versus if I'm sitting right there in the pits with you. The only difference is you have the 3mm Allen and the 14T handle or 8T handle, whatever, making your own adjustments, right? And don't be afraid to write notes. I mean, all pro teams do. I always tell people, wait till the end of the day, because you're going to go up in spring, down in spring. You're going to change all these different things, right? But at the end of the day, when you've finally gone the fastest you've ever gone, well, now you run write down these numbers, and the temperature of the day and all that other stuff, so that when you get back to that track at that time or whatever, it works good. Street bike riding is a little bit different story because there's so many variables, but again, you got to ask yourself, what is it do you want this thing to do? Generally, if we set a bike up for canyons, it'll be great in the canyon, but you'll hate it in the parking lot. You'll hate it driving down the freeway or whatever it may be, because it's like taking a NASCAR or Formula One car and putting it on the freeway. It just doesn't work because you're not riding the vehicle to its setup.
Yeah.
So, but
when you mentioned that issue of does the bike finish a corner? I think even street riders can have that feeling of does it finish a corner, right? That's not like a track only thing.
Yeah.
I think about, because you and I have talked about this personally several times about this exact thing. And it feels to me like it's kind of a balance of getting enough load to transfer to the rear so it grips and drives, but not so much so that it squats and kind of like blows through the stroke, and you kind of end up on like a chopper where the front end's really raked out and it doesn't want to steer anymore. But you can go too far, right? You mentioned, hey, if that happens, you add some preload to not just smash through the rear stroke so quickly. But if you get too stiff on the rear, then you're kind of like hiked up on the thing all the time. It never gets load into it.
Right. Or you can overwear the tire.
Yep.
The problem with most street riders is, you may know the canyon, but you're still not riding as fast as, say, being on the track. And a lot of times they'll kind of creep around the corner, and then they hammer the throttle. Oh, there's the exit. I'm going to do all this. Well, that rider that is ham-fisted, well, guess what? You're transferring all that energy to just do that. Or you're ham-fisted with the brakes doing this. And that's why you look at like brake master cylinders, like a real racing master cylinder versus a street master cylinder. Street master cylinders are kind of like, they're like a built-in ABS. The harder you squeeze, the less leverage it actually gives on the brakes because the manufacturer doesn't want you to lock up that front end. But some people decide, oh, I'm going to do it. And so now they have ABS on the bike, right? Which you don't see any ABS units on any real race bike. So depending how you ride can also affect on how, what the bike is going to do. Generally slower riders, and they hate hearing this, generally slower riders need heavier suspension because they're heavier on the brakes, because they pro racers ease into the brakes. You look at their graphs, they ease into the brakes, they ease into the throttle, or their electronics are doing this for them, where a lot of street riders will tend to hammer the brakes. Oh, where am I going? Where am I going? Okay, now I'm going to hammer the throttle. And you're just doing this big seesaw thing. Fast riders, they'll just tap the brake just to get the thing to turn, and they're back on the gas again.
I think it's assumed like, oh, as I get faster and faster as a rider, I'll need stiffer springs to deal with how much force I'm putting into the bike. But I think when you and I first started working together, I think you took the springs I had in the bike, I can't remember what it was in the front, and I think you went down to like a 0.85.
Yeah, you had like 9.5 or a 9.5 and a 1.0, I think. And I'm like, no.
And I'm without gear, I'm 180 pounds. So I'm not a little guy. And yeah, we went down to like a 0.85, which is way softer than even factory springs.
Yeah.
And it worked great.
Stock springs are 105s.
Yeah.
In that bike. And again, they don't want you to bottom out. So therefore they'll put heavy springs. A normal street bike usually is pretty far on the nose, so it could turn in quickly and be really nimble in the parking lot. But again, as you've noticed on the racetrack, it's a whole different world. Again, I know we're talking mostly street stuff. So even then, when a rider thinks he's riding really, really hard, I still think, even those street bike riders that I work with, I still do softer springs. It makes it more compliant, and the bike's actually easier to control. It tightens up a corner when you want it to. I mean, just easier to ride. It really is. So
let's talk for a second about actual components. So you mentioned, we've actually made this point on the podcast, so it's good that you're reinforcing it. But the brand of product you put on the bike, Öhlins is good. K-Tech is good.
Sure.
Like, all of these brands make good products. It's more about, can you get it set up and can you get support for what you put on the bike?
yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned that you work mostly with K-Tech and Öhlins, I would assume that, my opinion anyway, those are probably the two bigger brands in sport bikes, at least.
Yeah. Öhlins is big in the world level, and so is K-Tech. But K-Tech actually, they haven't marketed themselves in America as much as Öhlins has, right? Yep. I mean, Öhlins used to stock $5-6 million in product here in the United States, where K-Tech are like who, and Nitron and Bitubo, and these are all their great manufacturers. But again, just because you buy that product doesn't necessarily mean it'll work good for you. Mm-hmm. That also has to do with your tuner, and maybe your tuner will change the valving or change the settings or whatever it may be. And I think that's the difference in just, I see plenty of shops that, oh yeah, I went to the shop and I bought this cartridge kit, they threw it in there and it's horrible. I go, well, did they do any setup with it, or did they ask you? And well, they asked me my weight. I'm like, okay, well, honestly, I don't spring a bike for how much a person weighs, unless you're like 300 pounds. I spring a bike for how the rider reacts on the bike. Mm-hmm.
And I think some of these questions are going to really dovetail with some of the things that you're saying, and might be really more, it might really fit them. So the first one was, this is from Name Freeze. What can a suspension upgrade give me as a street rider?
Generally, aftermarket suspension, I think the bike will be more compliant. Because honestly, most stock suspension, I mean, they're okay, but that's also like saying the tires that come on most bikes, they're basically just rim protectors, right? The shock and the forces basically hold the bike up, and I don't know, probably half the riders out there, it doesn't matter to them, right? They want to buy that bike so they can cruise down to their local bar, their local hangout, and just be cool with the people, right? Brand new knee pucks that have never touched the ground, whatever, do whatever makes you happy. Um, but yeah, it's, aftermarket suspension, I think I mean, if properly set up, yes, can make the rider feel way more confident of their rides, of their bike.
And the second half of his question is, um, he's asking for how he should approach suspension upgrades. Like, step one, do I do spring rate for my weight? Step two, get cartridges. Step three, like, he doesn't really know what process he should follow for how to upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, generally, and not everybody has the funding to do that because, quite frankly, the stuff's not cheap. Most manufacturers do make a more inexpensive kits. Like K-Tech, they have an IDS system and their Razor Shock. It's a lower level brand, but I would say it's still better than stock. It does have more range of adjustments, whether it's ride height or preload or rebound, because some of the suspension out there on these bikes don't have any adjustability at all, right? Or especially if you ride two up, or say the exact opposite, say you weigh 105 pounds, right? And the suspension's not moving. Well, going to aftermarket stuff can help you. And therefore you can, get the right spring range. Like for me, I carry springs and front end springs from like 0.6 to 1.5s, and again, ask the rider, what are you doing with this bike? Again, some bikes like a 400 Ninja or an R3, there's no adjustments whatsoever. This is what you get. Changing to an aftermarket system would make the bike way more compliant, and you'll just be more comfortable. And how do you go about it? I mean, realistically, you should do both at the same time. But if you had to choose, I'd probably do a shock first, because the shock is more the center of the bike than the forks are.
So the next question, I'm not going to say his name because it's a bad word.
Welcome to YouTube.
But it's a really great question. And he goes, I've never fully understood how preload works. My understanding of a spring is that most springs used in motorcycle shocks are linear. And when you preload the spring, you'll have less spring to use. I think most people have a false understanding that now the rest of the spring becomes stiffer, but that's not how that works in my experience. The next most common word everyone uses is sag when it comes to preload, but I don't understand how this relates. Perhaps I just need a breakdown of how the preload is applied and how does preload work in general.
The reason why you do preload in any spring is, well, my rendition of it is for feel. So imagine this. So if you have a known spring length, right? If you don't have any spring preload, it's kind of like walking on a bed, right? You don't know where the bottom is. It's really mushy and stuff, and you're like, I don't know. Yeah, you lack some feel. Putting preload into the spring, now you're compressing the spring, requires more energy to move it, but it's giving you feel of what that spring is, right? Again, if you're not in the right range, depending on your weight, and I know I said that, I said it to how the rider rides, there's always that fine line, right? You got to find that balance of, okay, what are you doing with this bike, right? And how are you riding this bike? But preload in a fork or preload in a shock is there just initially to give you feel of what that spring is doing. Some riders like a heavy spring, or some tuners like a heavy spring, no preload. But the problem is it makes the ride harsh, and all what they call the low speed system That's all that like 1 inch movement on the ground. Well, if the spring's so stiff, the bike's going to feel really, really harsh, right? But if you have a soft spring, even if you put preload into it, the spring can still move and still follow all those little follow the grounds, right? And again, this is where valving comes into play. If your spring's really soft, you need to add enough valving to slow the rate of that spring compressing. And the same thing, you want to control that compressed energy back out, right? You don't want it springing back in your face or springing it back in your hips. So you have to find that fine line. I think too many people are so like, well, it's got to be 12 clicks. It's got to be this much preload. It's got to be that. It doesn't have to be anything. Change something, ride the bike, change it again, ride the bike again. I mean, that's all pro riders. They do the same thing. It doesn't matter what track they're at. They all do the same thing. They're always chasing that setup. So street riders, same thing. Just recognize that you have a bigger racetrack because you're talking about the world. So you have to, don't be afraid to make some changes there.
All right, so this next question is from Andre. He's a regular viewer of the channel. He comments on pretty much everything that we do. And he's talking about, he has some Lindemann Engineering, which is another suspension shop in California. And he says, working with Lindemann Engineering, he has a fascinating philosophy on springs. He runs a fairly low static preload number, between 4 and 6 millimeter, which he thought was excellent, but he doesn't think the mid-stroke behavior is as good. And adding preload doesn't seem to particularly solve the problem, because he thinks the spring load's too soft.
No, I mean, it could. Again, it depends on what the rider wants. I'm usually, I keep wanting to not say it's me, but this is how I do my things. Preload, I'm usually 12, 14, turns. You put preload into that spring because that is going to give you more feel with that rate. Again, if you're only doing like 3 millimeters or 5 millimeters of if I'm less than 6 millimeters of preload, actually less than 8, I'll change springs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. If I get less than 8 because the rider's not using all the stroke, or they wanted to be able to tighten up a corner, or whatever it is that they want the bike to do, if I'm less than 8, then I'll recommend softer springs. That's the unfortunate thing with most street riding, and or stock suspension, is you don't really have that bigger range. And yes, you can buy, like Race Tech, they make aftermarket fork springs and shock springs. You can change the springs, but then now, because you are possibly going to a heavier spring, well, then now the valving needs to keep up with that spring, right? So here comes, now you're chasing all these shim stacks and all these things, and it can be a little overwhelming at times, but unfortunately, this is what it takes to make the rider comfortable. Pro racers to street bike riders, that's always the same. And like I said, you got to ask yourself, what do you want this bike to do?
This question I thought was really good. And what riding behaviors or actions commonly look like suspension problems?
Being ham-fisted or being not smooth. If you ever, I get this kind of cheap because I get to look at a data trace and I can see somebody that, they've let off the throttle and then they're like 2%, 4%, 8%, and you see them slowly start to progress on the throttle. Where I've come into a lot of different riders and it's like they're at 0%, they're back at 20%, they're back at 0%. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Are you slowing down? Or are you giving a gas? I mean, make a decision what it is that you're doing. And because you're doing all this, or you're 14 bar pressure, 6 bar pressure, 14 bar, and you're going doing all this, guess what? The bike's doing all that. Well, the suspension's only doing what you tell the bike to do. And if you're doing this, well, then the bike's going to do that. But then it's you. It's not the bike. You're the one making that bike do that. Once you get to a certain spot, stay there. Best thing to do most of the time is nothing. You're committed. Now start accelerating, right? Not, I think I got to stop. Wait, I think I got to this. Street bike riding is a little bit different story because, there's so many variables. And again, I don't care how fast you think you are. You're still better off, I think, being on the softer side of suspension. I think you'll just enjoy the vehicle a lot more.
How can someone tell if they're overloading the front versus not trusting it enough?
That's a lot of different variables because it can be suspension. It can be a lot of times could be tire pressure. And tire pressures on a race tire are so different compared to what we run on the street. I mean, tire pressures, say the Dunlop tires, we'll run 40 to 45 pounds of pressure in the front tire on a Dunlop. The reason you run that higher pressure is to keep the tire round as you're braking into the corner. So it doesn't feel like you're riding on a melted ice cream sandwich or something, right? Or it's just mushy. So you up the pressure to keep it round. The rear pressures were down at like 18, 19 to give you maximum grip, maximum contact patch. Mind you, on the street, it's again, a lot of people think that they're riding really, really, really hard. And riding slicks on the street is probably one of the dumbest things, even though I used to do it. I think we all did when we were doing street bike riding. You just don't ride the bike hard enough to keep those tires up to temp. There might be a few people out there in their local canyons that, might go okay, but still they're probably better off on a set of sport tires, Q5s or a set of Rossos or, Bridgestones or whatever it may be. Right. So, a lot of people never check tire pressures. And I think that's probably the biggest reason why, if they lack a confidence of going into a corner, is because the tire's either folding on itself or they told me to run this. Well, it said 44 pounds on the side of the tire. No, sir, that's fully loaded. And again, you tend to jump on the internet and try to find out all these answers. And instead of doing that, I would actually just call any suspension guy. You can call me, you can call anybody across the country, right? And they will give you a better answer than some guy that probably doesn't even ride a motorcycle that's being a keyboard warrior saying, yeah, you should run this. Okay.
What should a rider focus on to learn and articulate feel before chasing advanced suspension tuning?
Well, the unfortunate thing on stock suspension, there's not a lot you can do. And I don't care if you go out and buy, an expensive European bike that has, a name brand Olin suspension on it, right? Or it's that's for the rider to try different springs or more preload. Again, I tell people the reason why all those numbers are there or all those adjustments are there, they're there for a reason. Try it. You might like something better. And especially bikes that are from a dealership, I guarantee you 90% of them, the clickers have never been adjusted coming out of the box. They were however they were thrown in at the manufacturer, and could be closed, could be open, and at least see where your settings are at, right? And so at least know where you're at. Start in the middle, somewhere in the middle, whatever it is. Find out what maximum is, what minimum is. Start in the middle. Go ride your bike. And then, like you said, make a big change. 5 or 6 clicks, 5 or 6 turns of preload. Make a big change to see if you can feel the difference in the bike. And if you do, then hey, that was better, or no, that was worse. But at least you have a starting point of trying to make the bike better for you. And you'll find that the stock stuff usually doesn't have as much range as you'd like. And this is where you come into, aftermarket products.
And if you could teach one principle that most riders never fully understand about their suspension, what would it be?
I probably revert back to the basic questions of, does the bike finish a corner? Is the bike stable? Is it doing the basic things that you want the bike to do? Can you tighten up a corner? Once you get that kind of understanding of what you want that bike to do and what your suspension is capable of doing, then you can start making changes. I do see this for these new track day riders. It was, hey, what's the setup? I'm like, what do you mean? Well, I'm going to go to the track this weekend for my first time. So what's my setup? I'm like, just ride your bike. Why chase your tail? Even pro riders will do this. Oh, let's get the thing set up. I'm like, just ride your bike from the last time you rode it and be comfortable with it, and then make changes based on what you want the bike to do, and not just settle for, oh, this is what it is. And, because you can always make changes. I've had people say, well, I don't know. Oh, you don't know? I'll get the screw and I'll turn it all the way in, or I'll add all the preload. Go ride again. Oh my God, that's horrible. Well, then you lied to me. You told me you didn't know, right? So now you have a point of direction of what you want that rider, or what that rider wants that bike to do.
Brian and I had an experience with Champ School years ago, and we talked, but Champ School had us on the bikes, they had us turn all the things to zero, preload to zero, compression to zero, rebound to zero, and then go turn some laps. And then they had us like crank everything to the max and then go ride some laps. Oh, yeah. And it was one of the most enlightening experiences in the world, because the bike with everything set to zero was relatively easy to ride.
When it was all the way opened up, all the rebound, everything was opened up as much as it could. It was really obvious when you made a mistake. And what you said, Mike, about, hey, a lot of these issues are coming from what you're telling the bike, the inputs you're giving it, right? Are you smashing onto the front end? Are you hammering the gas in the middle of a corner? All that kind of stuff. When we opened up all the suspension, it was like all your sins were revealed. Like every little mistake you made, it was just painfully obvious that you're like, oh, I'm abrupt right here. What am I doing in this transition?
Yes.
But you got so much input from it. You're like, oh, I need to smoothen up here a little. I need to do this a little more. And you could get, maybe not as fast, but you could get pretty dang fast with a wide open suspension. You just had to be dead smooth and perfect kind of everywhere.
Right.
But then when you went to the fully locked up setup, man, it just felt like you were ice skating everywhere. You couldn't get the tires.
Yeah, suspension's not moving. The tire is just skidding across the top of the pavement because it can't move. I've seen the exact opposite. I see tires, like you see these people that come in and says, oh, my tire's just shredded. Well, okay. So you ask them basic questions, what's spraying, this, that, there, and the other. A lot of times we'll actually take away mechanical grip, like a rear tire that's just shredding no matter what, right? And it's the right compound for the right, that temperature. Take away mechanical grip, because the reason your tire is shredding is because it's getting overworked, right? It doesn't shred because it's not working. You've put too much load into it. So how do you do that? Well, you don't want to slow down, right? You don't want to not give it gas or not give it brake. So we'll change geometry in a motorcycle to take away some mechanical grip, so that the rider doesn't have to worry about, oh, am I shredding my tire now? What am I doing? You take away the mechanical grip so that you still have grip coming out of the corner, but not to the point where it's shredding your tire. Right. And we've experienced this at Utah and a bunch of different racetracks, and some tracks, again, especially like new paved tracks like Barber, when you have brand new polished surface, well, guess what? Now that track has all the grip in the world. Well, guess what? Now you need to either run a harder compound tire, which is what most of the manufacturers do, or you change settings in the chassis to take away that mechanical grip so it doesn't shred the tire. Because you can have all the grip in the world, but at the end of a 15 or 20 lap race, you have no grip, then you just go backwards, right? So again, this is more racetrack information versus the street. But I would tell people, for street riders, just check your tire pressures. Most of them don't. That's always a big thing. They just assume it's good. I've seen racers do this. Racers will get their bike, pull out of the trailer, throw warmers on it, go race. Did you check your tire pressure? I did 2 rounds ago. What? I mean, it's crazy, but it does happen. So, yeah, if you value your life, just check your stuff. Spend 5 minutes. Make sure bolts aren't going to fall off the bike and things aren't leaking. And tire pressure is actually, where they're supposed to be, or at least in a range.
Well, good. I think this was great. I I've got a list of questions that we even scratched the surface on a lot of this stuff. Maybe we'll end up having to do another one of these episodes here in a couple months.
Absolutely, anytime.
So, I think this was great. A couple of little takeaways. I wrote down some notes. You know, like you mentioned, you tend to prefer slightly softer springs with a bit more preload. It gives a bit more feel for riders. I think that's a great point for people to think about. You know, you reiterated the point we made, which was the right suspension upgrade for you is the one that you can get support for.
Yes,
Right? If
absolutely.
there's someone who you can work with and get guidance on, that's the right one. I mean, if this conversation, if nobody got anything from this conversation, it was the fact that this stuff is incredibly complicated and there's a lot of moving parts to making sure these things are working right.
Yeah.
And it is going to be really, really hard for you to figure that out totally on your own without any kind of help or background.
Right.
So,
Yeah, even like, well, to go back on some suspension, like the electronic suspension.
Mhm.
Honestly, like when we're on the street or on the racetrack, I turn all that stuff off, where I put it in manual mode, because all the electronics trying to do is try and keep that bike level. You get on the brakes, the IMU says, hey, the bike's diving, I'm going to lock up the front end. Well, guess what? With the front end locked up, it ain't going to want to turn, right? It's going to run straight. Or you get on the gas, well, now it wants to do this and squat down in the rear. Well, the shock, since it's squeezing down, so it locks up the rear, right? And then next thing you know, you lose grip because the tire is just skidding across the top of the pavement because the suspension can't move. Just like you guys talked about earlier about, you know, you loosened up all the suspension on the bikes and you went and rode it. You're like, oh my God, the bike's actually doing what I wanted to do, versus when you stiffen it all up, well, now I'm going backwards, or it's uncomfortable, or whatever it may be. So it's the same thing in the electronic suspension. Again, most of it, in my opinion, is really more of an insurance thing. You know?
Yeah, I have 2 bikes with the Mechatronic Olean suspension, and I believe both of them are in manual mode right now.
Yes. Yeah. You know, I mean, yeah, it's a great idea for, you know, they think that nobody knows how to ride a bike, right? So that's why they put in the ABS and the way the master cylinders are designed and electronic suspension. And even in sport mode, it's, I don't know. I think a well-tuned suspension can work way better than any electronic stuff out there.
It's funny you say that, because that's the advice I give all the time when people come to me. It's like, oh, I'm looking at like the Panigale with the Mechatronic or the Panigale with the base. Which one should I get? And I'm almost always, just get the base, and the money you save, go spend that in suspension tuning if you should need it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do it all the time. And you'll save your money and you'll be happier, way happier with your bike.
Mike, thank you so much for spending an hour with us to share your wisdom with us. And for everyone out there watching, if you have questions, Mike, where can they find you?
You can go to my website, or you can find me on Facebook, or you can find me on Instagram. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways. Or email me. Name of my shop is FuziMoto.us Incorporated, or FuziMoto.us@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you again. And we will see you next week.